It's impossible not to recognize the orchestrated shift taking place. Not just the Ukraine war and the Russian sanctions, but I mean, even with that issue, you should notice that overwhelmingly, the isolation of Russia from Western economies was not actually the result of legal sanctions imposed by the US or European governments. It was by private sector choice. Most of the companies that exited Russia and which have cut ties with Russia in one way or another did not do so by state coercion, but by their own initiative. And companies do not, and most legally cannot, make choices that predictably negatively impact profits. They have obligations to their shareholders. If they severed ties with Russia without being forced to do so by sanctions, then it was a business decision, which by necessity has to be in the interests of the company. So are profits down? No. Profits are at record highs. One of the results of the break from Russia has also been to move Russia more towards the BRICS countries and other developing economies. But again, you can look at other policies, not just Ukraine. Look at, for instance, the Green New Deal and all the propaganda around climate change. The obvious and already existing solution for carbon-free energy is just ignored or deliberately shoved to the side, which is nuclear energy. And instead, a whole new business and financial sector has been created by the hype, from carbon credits to electric vehicles and so on. And it has also become, importantly, a very powerful pretext for the imposition of severe austerity in Europe. I mean, why does no one seem to see the contradiction between the demand to reduce energy consumption on the one hand, while also, on the other hand, simultaneously promoting automation and robotics? Human workers certainly are more energy efficient than machines powered by electricity. So you are urgently trying to reduce energy consumption or desperately trying to find alternative sources of energy while simultaneously promoting measures that will drastically increase energy consumption, i.e. robotics and automation. That tells you that this is a false pretext. It's just a way of imposing deprivation on Western populations, austerity measures, to condition them for what everyone knows is going to be a bleak future. It's a way to de-industrialize Europe and to help change the center of gravity of the global economy to the global south. The EU wants to make solar power a major source of energy, for instance, over the next couple of decades. They want 20% of Europe's energy to be derived from solar power by 2040. Okay. But already from now, in 2023, they are importing solar energy from Africa, from Morocco. The UK is going to build a transmission cable going from Morocco to Devon for $80 million, connecting the UK to Ouarzazate solar farm in Morocco, in the deserts of Morocco. Okay, all of the solar panels at that farm, at Ouarzazate solar farm, were manufactured and provided by China. China controls 80% of the global market share in the production of solar panels. So going solar directs economic ties towards the global south and towards China. You are literally shifting energy dependence instead of going nuclear and having energy independence, because energy is just a lever for steering economic activity this way or that way. But look further into it. Creating solar panels is highly, highly energy intensive. Fossil fuel energy is used to create solar panels. So the demand for solar energy means China uses more fossil fuels, boosts their industrial consumption, creating more demand by China for oil and gas from the GCC, which increases their revenues. So energy deprivation in Europe, under the pretext of climate change, is a bonanza for BRICS nations and would-be BRICS nations. Because again, the actual obvious solution for carbon-free energy already exists. There's no new technology needed. It's nuclear energy. Meanwhile, Germany has closed all of its nuclear facilities and forced energy austerity upon their population for no reason whatsoever. You can usually deduce the reasons for policy by looking at that policy's outcome. Well, the outcome of things like the Ukraine war, the Green New Deal, and the sanctions against Russia has been nothing but the degradation, destabilization, and deindustrialization of Europe and the movement of economic activity, dependence, and benefit to the BRICS countries and to the global south. It certainly hasn't been, the outcome certainly hasn't been freedom and democracy in Ukraine, or the financial collapse of Russia, or solving the climate crisis. So you tell me, are all of the tangible and predictable outcomes of these policies supposed to be regarded as accidental? Maybe, but it seems unlikely. But the important thing for the OCGFC, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, the Western OCGFC, is that they get to determine how economic activity in the global south proceeds, how prosperity is distributed. Because remember, most Western societies experienced very lopsided prosperity under neoliberalism. They created very wealthy nations on paper by GDP, but they also created enormous wealth gaps. The income pyramid became an obelisk, with a tiny fraction of the population owning the vast majority of the wealth in their countries, with wage stagnation or decline for the regular workers, the obliteration of organized labor, and tremendous misery for millions upon millions of their citizens. So they will want this same development model in the global south. I mean, neoliberalism, of course, has already been imposed in the global south for decades. But the US and the global north, the West, have historically been the beneficiaries of that. And the real beneficiaries have been a very select few. Well, now there will be something like that in the global south, in BRICS, if they get to direct the transition. So in BRICS nations, and in one of the BRICS nations, there will be increased GDP, sure. There will be the creation of more billionaires. General standards of living will probably improve, but so will the cost of living. They would like to see local OCGFC partner with Western OCGFC as junior partners, and the sort of solidification of basically a collaborator class within the BRICS nations and the global south nations. The coordinated global response to COVID-19, the lockdowns and so forth, taking a sledgehammer to small and medium-sized businesses, and with the IMF encouraging countries in the global south to spend and spend and spend in relief packages far above and beyond what they could afford to do, so that they would be forced to appeal to the IMF for loans and financial assistance, basically to pummel their economies and their budgets until they would be in no position to resist privatization, neoliberal reforms, foreign takeover of vital sectors of their economy, with only the largest local companies able to survive. All of this, it seems to me, is also connected to the global economic transition, the pivot south, and the OCGFC simply trying to ensure optimal conditions for securing their desired terms for how that transition should take place. Because look, with COVID, with Ukraine, with the climate, rational and effective policies were and are possible and obvious. But in each scenario, other options were taken, all of which have disproportionately economic outcomes, and all of which economic outcomes move the global economy in the same trajectory, and none of which actually address the problems that they were formally implemented to resolve. It's a massive PR misdirection, because the owners and controllers of global financialized capital cannot exactly just come out and say explicitly, we have decided that the West is in an irreversible state of decay, and that your societies, your people, your nations are not as important as our shareholders, so we are moving elsewhere. They can't say that, but that's what's happening under the cover of preserving public health, securing democracy in Ukraine, and saving the earth from global warming.